Good morning. I'm Marcus Shaw, the CEO of Colab, and I'd like to welcome everybody to Build, Manage, Sell Conversations with our guest today, Tommy Kail. I hope everyone's having a great startup week. Today, Tommy will share with us how he helped build one of the biggest startups in Broadway history. We have a great treat after the broadcast. Tommy will join us for Q&A, where you'll get to ask him questions about what it feels like to be one of the best directors in the history of Broadway and what that process looks like. We also have an incredible opportunity to share Hamilton with some lucky winners that are listening today. So please click in the link for the survey that will allow you to enter a chance to win an annual subscription to Disney Plus, where you can see Hamilton for yourself. We'll join back here at about 12 o'clock for Q&A with Tommy. Enjoy the show and have a great day. Build, Manage, Sell Conversations is a series of podcasts with creators, innovators, and entrepreneurs from all walks of life. Hello, my name is Marcus Shaw, and welcome to Colab's Build, Manage, Sell Conversations, where we talk with entrepreneurs and innovators about what it takes to be successful. Today, I have award-winning director Thomas Kail, who's going to tell us about the pathway to success. Tommy, it's a pleasure to meet you.
The pathway to success? Oh, I think I got the wrong email. I don't know. I don't think I'm the person for you, but I'm happy to be here.
You've had a little bit of success, right? Where would folks know you from, Tommy?
I don't know, from going to 7th and 8th grade to Latin class with you. That's
right.
Probably it.
That's right. Well, we've known each other for a long time, and
yes.
It's incredible to see the success that you've had over the years. Tommy, obviously, folks know you as the director of Hamilton, the smash Broadway hit that set records really across the world for Broadway. But you've been at this game for quite some time, and you've earned it in the way that a lot of people probably don't understand or appreciate. Tell us a little bit about how you got here and what your why was when we talk about entrepreneurship.
Well, you know, it's interesting, right? I mean, we've all heard this expression, right? It's like you're a 20-year overnight success, and no one really wants to look at the first 10 years where you're just like underground and eating dirt and working for free. But I started doing theater really late in life. I mean, respectively for it. I didn't start until I was 21. We went to high school together, and I played sports my whole life. And you did one or the other. They practiced at the same time, as it were. So I took one acting class in high school, which was compulsory, you know, and then ended up taking one more, but not as any means to express or, you know, look into the future, but more just, I guess I have to do it because of a core curriculum. And then I liked this one class. I had a teacher named John Elko, who I liked very much when I was in high school. And then I went off to college. I went to Western University, really not knowing anything about what I wanted to do other than I was excited to start over. I felt like leaving DC and leaving the DC area, I grew up in Northern Virginia, went to school in DC, was going to be a fresh start for me. And so I think I just found myself with a kind of openness. And I think really for me, and this is something that I think we'll probably trace through this, I was a kid where for the first 10, 12 years of my life, everything came very easily. And then when I got, actually around when I met you in 7th grade, I had to deal with challenges in a new way. Like I couldn't just, you know, not study for the tests. I couldn't just show up at practice. Like I started to be confronted by a lot of other people that were really good at what they did. And what I did as a compensating mechanism was I stopped trying, because if I didn't try, then I had an excuse. Then there was distance between me and the why. Yeah, but if I had studied, but if I had worked harder, if I had, and I was really, I feel like that was my high school year, like, you know, like all throughout, like, I hadn't had that thing drop in that really, I think made me aware of the privilege that I was afforded, of the opportunities that I was given. And when I went to college, I had a very clear moment my sophomore year. My parents went to college. My grandparents did not. One of them did, and one of them went back later. But I remember walking across campus on a really clear blue sky day, and I remember I was going to my first English class, my sophomore year, and I just thought, your grandparents came from somewhere else, you know, your great grandparents, you know, traveled from Poland and Russia. My grandparents were first generation, you know, were born here. Like, who are you to not take advantage of this opportunity and make the most of it? And so just for this one class, lay into it. see what happens. And I did, and I found myself really kind of sparking. It was around that time, that next year, that I started working in the theater, but in the student-run theater. And what I liked about the student-run theater at Wesleyan is it basically was encouraging entrepreneurship. They'd say, here's $200, and here's the gym on April 1st through 4th. Go make a show. And you had to go do everything. You had to market the show, you had to cast the show, you had to produce the show, you had to advertise the show, you had to build the thing. And so I took that, and when I moved to New York, in the New York area, I lived in New Jersey for about a year and a half. I felt like I was behind because I hadn't been doing this a lot, and I didn't have any real formal education in it. So I worked as an ASM, like a PA, sort of like very low level at this little theater in New Jersey, and I concurrently started my own company. And I started my own company, which was called Backhouse Productions, which existed really between like 2001 and 2006, because no one would hire us. Like that's the big secret. When you're a young director, no one's going to hire you. If you're a young actor, you can get hired. If you're a young writer, there's a chance, but no one's going to really say, here's thousands of dollars, go make a production, except for maybe your silly friends. And so that's what I did. I had a couple buddies from college, one of whom was a writer-actor, one of whom was a writer-director-actor, and the other was, a writer and an actor. And none of them, sort of tried to do what I did, and I didn't try to do what they did. We all just complemented each other beautifully. They all were interested in directing and producing in the same way I was, but they also really had a performance bug that I didn't have. And so it allowed me to be outside of the thing. And we just had this little lab on 40th Street at the Drama Bookshop, based on the Drama Bookshop. And that's about when I bumped back into you. I think it was 2004. Right. I went to the same college as Lin-Manuel, but he was a freshman when I was a senior. And as I like to say, I wasn't talking to freshmen. So I'd heard about him, but didn't know him at all. And then started this little company, but I heard in the Heights in 2000. So before I'd even actually started my company. And I said, when does he graduate? And my friend said 2002. They had seen this really early proto version of In the Heights that he had written, and he had directed in the same student theater I worked. And I said, let's go meet him, in May of 2002 when he graduates. And that's what we did. And we started our little company to kind of get the wheels greased a little bit. And then we invited him down to this basement and said, we want to work on your show. And he didn't have anything better to do. So he said yes. And we just sat in that basement for years making this thing. And in that laboratory, I think that's where we got our 10,000 hours. So there's obviously a big jump from here to the next thing, but that's what that early thing was. I liked storytelling. I liked collaborating. And what happened for me with sports, I think, is directly related to this, because I was really good until I was like 12 or 13, and I could see the game very clearly. And then I was able to really kind of grapple with my own mortality in some way, because at 12 or 13, I saw other people excel and move way past me in terms of their physicality, but I could still see the game clearly. So what I had was information here that I couldn't use myself, but I knew how to communicate with my teammates. I did a lot of coaching sort of on the field, even when I was on the sideline. I was a camp counselor, which is a similar kind of thing. Can you take a disparate group of people and unify them so they're all moving in one direction, which I think is what leadership and what directing is. And that was sort of like the Mr. Miyagi, me learning it, until I started directing and realizing, oh, coaching and directing are the same thing. Preseason is pre-production, rehearsal is practice, the game is the show, the post-mortem is the post-mortem. And that really, I think it made me feel accessed and useful. And I think I was always seeking utility in some way.
When you think about the four of you back in 2004, mm-hmm. and you think about the role that everybody played on that team, what kind of friction did you have early on? We see that a lot with entrepreneurs, right? It's hard, the norming of the team. Can you talk a little bit about what that looked like and where you guys were in 2001 through 2004, and then, where you are today?
Yeah, it's interesting, because I was someone, and I definitely, when you play sports, you have hard-ass coaches, and you have coaches who are comforters, and then you have coaches you realize that are code switching. And by necessity, they shouldn't be talking to me the same way they're talking to my teammates to my left or my right. I think you have to be able to talk to a group and be clear for everybody to receive the message. And then you need to know, who do you put your arm around? Who do you talk to only about their family? Who wants to only talk tactics? Who needs you to push them a little harder to, and encourage them in a different way. And I think that with that initial group, my friend John Mailer, Neil Stewart, and Anthony Viniziali, we all believed in each other. So there was enormous faith. And I think that it was the first time I'd been around a group where, because there was no coach, right? It was just us. Like in a way, we were peer supervised. There wasn't an adult watching. And I think because we felt this kind of responsibility for each other, I think that's probably where I learned in some way that you make the best things with harmony. And I've sort of dedicated my career to trying to make high quality things with the removal of the cauldron of pain, and this idea that great pain creates great art. I think it's mythology. I think it might for other people, but for me, it's a personal mythology. And so I tried to disabuse, anyone that I worked with of that notion and debunk that theory, which means like when you come into this room, I want to make it safe, and I want an environment where whatever you say, especially when you're in the process of making theater, which is so iterative, and there isn't one way to do anything. I think getting out of the sort of math and science brain that I cultivated was really healthy for me, because I think what it allowed me to do was realize that there's a lot of different ways up the mountain. So, again, that doesn't mean, that there weren't times when we didn't have a disagreement, but a disagreement didn't happen to elevate to discord. And I think the other thing that we did really well is we talked about the things we were feeling. And I think that came from this sort of baseline of love. Like, we cared about each other and we wanted the other person to succeed. And I think even early on, this doesn't mean it doesn't get more complicated as things go, that I never thought that success was binary. This idea that there's only enough for, this group of people and not this group of people, or if you have it, that I can't have it. I just never subscribed to that. And in a way, like, one of the lines in Hamilton, the world was wide enough for both Hamilton and me, was Lynn and I identifying a line in Chernows' book, something that Burr said directly, that really spoke to our feeling about what it meant to be a part of the theater, which is someone else's success doesn't preclude ours. In fact, it's just making the doorway a little bit wider, or teaching us a new way to work. So there wasn't a lot of pain in that time. There wasn't a lot of, I think there was a lot of growth, and there was, by necessity, stretching, but we were always for each other, and I believe that you make the best things because of and not in spite of.
So, Tommy, there's something that you mentioned about kind of prototyping in Broadway, and I think a lot of people don't understand the process for developing a Broadway show, or really any kind of theatrical process. But we do talk a lot about prototyping for ventures and for startups. Can you tell us a little bit about what that process looks like in theater, and are there any similarities to the lean startup model that we hear so much about, kind of that iterative process? Are there any analogies there between theater and a tech startup even?
I think so. And, and you and I have spoken about this sort of, off camera, about the idea that I feel like in some way my job is to start companies and to build them strong with a team, and then make sure that they can function fluidly without me. Because if I build something and it needs me to be there, I feel like I failed. And the nature of making theater is most of the things you make have a very, steep slope to zero. They close really quickly. You can work at the Arena stage in DC or at the Public Theater in New York City, and your show is going to run for 8 weeks. And like, that's it. Like, that's success. Success is mounting the show, having it run for 8 weeks. If it's a straight play, so a non-musical, maybe it gets published, which means then it can be done in Atlanta and San Francisco and in Toronto and in Berlin. But that's a license of that. That's not necessarily your production. Someone can license your production, but often what they're doing is licensing the play and making their own. So the process of making a straight play is much more compressed. Now, the elements are the same. There's the gestation. There's somebody coming with an idea, whether it's an article or story that happened to them. Sometimes people have handed me a script that was 100 pages long, and we went to work on that. Sometimes someone came to me with a scene. Sometimes I went to a writer and said, hey, I think there's a story here. Do you want to get in there? Like, I like to begin the process. I like to be in there early. It's very rare that someone hands me something that's completed and then I just go and stage it and cast it. That's not particularly interesting to me. So I would say, and there are, everything I say is completely subjective, and there are lots of anomalies to this. But if you're working on a straight play, usually for me, I've done 25 of them in my life, from inception and conversation, if it actually gets to production, is like 2 or 3 years. Whereas a musical is usually between 5, 7, 8 years. That's pretty common. It's very hard to do a musical faster than 5 years. To wit, and just to speak about some of the ones that I've done, I first heard a cast recording from a student production of In the Heights in 2000. I waited 2 years for Lynn to graduate. I worked with Lynn from 2002 to 2007, which was our first production off Broadway. There were lots of workshops, so we just did little pieces of it, 20 minutes here, maybe not stage, just sitting around a table reading, or up at music stands, kind of trying out the text. A lot of it is about making sure the text is solid, because without the text, there really isn't anything else. So if you look at that, we went to Broadway the next year. So I first heard it in 2000. I started working in 2002. It went to Broadway in 2008. And that was pretty fast. People were like, wow, that happened quickly for you. And I was like, yeah, well, you weren't in the basement with me from 2000 to 2007. But I think that each director or producer have different ways of developing. The way that I like to do it is in pieces. So in that particular instance, Lynn had a full college version of this show. It was 80 minutes long. It had 15 songs or so. The characters existed. It took place in Washington Heights. And we sort of just pulled it apart and put it back together. And I'd say maybe one song remained. Lots of melodies did, lots of characters did, but we brought in other collaborators, choreographer. One of the first people there was a music director right around the same time as we found another librettist, a book writer, who is the person who doesn't just write the scenes, but is the person that works with the composer lyricist. In our case with Lynn, that was the same person. Lynn was writing book, music, and lyrics at first for In the Heights, and we brought in someone to write the book. And that's not just the scenes in between, it's also the story through the songs. So that's like a really close collaborator. Hamilton was a very different experience. Lynn wrote one song. He didn't think it was from a show. He thought it was from an album, from a mixtape. And that was the song that he did at the White House for the Poetry Jam that Obama hosted in 2009. It took Lynn 2 years to write another song, which became the song My Shot. And it was at that little sort of fundraiser we were doing in 2011 where he performed My Shot, where I went up to him afterwards and I said, it's taken you 2.5 years to write 2 songs. We're going to be very old by the time you're done with this. Why don't we pick a date 6 months from now and let's work towards that. Let's work on 2 songs a month for 5 or 6 months and just see what happens. We did that from 2011 to the beginning of 2012. And when we came into this concert we did at Lincoln Center in 2012, there were 11 songs, 10 of which are in the show now. So things that really existed. But at that point, again, just working with a music director, arranger, Alex Lacamoire, who's a dear and close collaborator of ours. And then that show opened off Broadway in 2015, and later that year, on Broadway. So the first song was written in 2009. It opened in 2015, 6 years, and has continued from that day until today, when I had a call about it this morning, and that's 5 years later. So what people don't tell you is if it goes well, it's in your life for a long time. Right. Because most of the things we make are gone in 8 weeks or 12 weeks. When I was first doing shows, we only did 3 shows. They were gone in a weekend. So hopefully that speaks to some of that process. And again, just with the stuff that I've worked on, but those are sort of 2, I think, relatively normative examples in terms of timeline.
So really interesting. You talked about the public theater, and that was kind of where you get your first shot, right? And from that point, people decide whether or not this thing has the legs to go, to the next level. What was the reaction to Hamilton? I know you've told me this story, but I think it's one of the most fascinating stories I've ever heard. What was that process like, and how long did the show run there?
Yeah, so, and to step back and just contextualize a little bit, we started working in 2011 and beginning 2012, and it was just me and Lynn and a couple friends. In 2012, we did this concert in January of 2012, and a producer named Jeffrey Seller, who was one of the producers of In the Heights, so we had known him and gone through a lot of stuff with him and really trusted him. He said, I would like to enhance this and help you develop this and find an institutional theater, like a public theater, to develop it and stage it. But until then, it's just going to be us. So the public didn't actually enter our conversation until 2014. We spent 2 years developing it with Jeffrey. And he was the person who was doing the hiring with me, in terms of who we were bringing into it. He was the person who was financing it. And he was the person who was looking for outside investors or using his own funds to put up these little workshops, right? These 10 actors in a room for a week. And then another time it was 20 actors in a room for 5 weeks and add in a band, so it's a lot of sunk cost if the thing doesn't happen. By the time we were doing the staged workshop, which again is basically this, it's a developmental, it's like a beta test, right? You're inviting in maybe 50 people to come and see it, 100 people to come and see it. We didn't have costumes that are reminiscent of what we have now. There was very little set, there was no lighting. And then the next time we did it, okay, let's add in some costumes. Okay, let's try a few set pieces. So again, that iterative process, it is how we would learn about. There was no turntable, which is a very big part of the show, but we were doing this, on a taped out, rehearsal space. In fact, the one we did in 2014, right, we were working with the public, we didn't even stage the second act. We only staged the first act, and we sat around and did the second act at music stands, but an audience got to hear the art from start to finish. After that, the reaction to that was very enthusiastic. And in fact, what it caused us to do, this was in May of 2014, and we were slated for production in January of 15, is it actually caused us to batten down the hatches and say, okay, no more giving it away for free. Like, let's not invite people into the kitchen. Let's wait till they're sitting at the table and we serve the meal. And that was a really crucial decision for us because expectations were starting to get elevated. And I'm all about managing expectations. There was a lot of enthusiasm because of In the Heights and In Heights' fans, where the show had already sold out at the public when we went on sale. So in a good way, you're not really thinking about ticket sales. You know, there will be an audience and you know you'll learn. Now the public theater has 290 seats. And we were going to run there for maybe 6 weeks initially or something like that. I can't remember, 5, 6 weeks, maybe 7, 8 weeks. So a very limited amount of people, you know, 300 times 8 shows a week, you know, that's not a lot. So you're talking about 2,500 people roughly times 8. You're talking about 10, 12,000 people maybe seeing this. It's a very small number. You know, that's just, think about it. It's 1/100th of the people that listen to this podcast, right? I mean, that's how small that number is. So we did one long lead article with the New Yorker, and we didn't do any other press. We just went to work. And so when we opened for previews at the public on January 20th of 2015, the show was just like an anticipated rumor. You know, oh, did you see that thing 8 months ago? Oh, I saw a little bit here, but no one really had anything to gauge it by. And so in that way, I think it kind of allowed us to take the expectation level and put it back down. Was there excitement for it? Absolutely. Were enough people talking about it that there was that buzz that you look for? Because I think everything ultimately is word of mouth. Whether it's an app, whether it's a TV show, whether it's a movie, whether it's a piece of theater, whether it's a book. The question is, will I talk to you about it in conversation? Will I tell you about it on the subway? If we go out to eat food, by the time the appetizer comes, will I say, you have to read this thing. You have to watch this thing. And I feel like that's actually what gets, that gets us beyond the noise and sort of pierces that, that static, because there's just so much coming at us. And when we did that first performance, at that point, a few hundred people had seen a workshop 9 months earlier. And maybe a year before that, a few hundred people had seen something. So nobody had seen it. And then 290 people at a time, the drumbeat began. And I had a feeling early on. There was a statistical thing, which I'll tell you, which you might enjoy. But the public theater would, they had this app. There was like, they gave away 2 tickets for free for every show, like the first preview or something like that. And they would do this historically for their shows over the last 5 or 6 years. And then maybe it was more than that, maybe it was less than that. And I went to the head of marketing because I'm very interested in numbers and data and statistics and things like that. And I said, how many people usually sign up for, the first preview when you're giving away these 2 tickets? And they said, oh, like if it's a show that people are looking forward to, and I'm making this up slightly because I'm old, that was a long, long time ago. I remember she said maybe 700 people, like 500, 700 is a lot. And we had 12,000 people sign up to get a pair of tickets. And I remember just hearing that, and it was just like a ping, something pinged for me. It was like, oh, there's an energy around this that is unlike anything that I've experienced, where it was already pretty loud outside the theater. And so my job was to keep it quiet inside the theater, to keep it safe inside the theater, because that actually was the safest place we could be. And then once the show started, and the next time we went on sale, I think it was 5 or 6 days later, a big New Yorker article had come out that we had worked, with this one writer on, and the phone lines and the internet crashed at the public. It's like in the cartoons when like the thing is going through the wire and it's just too big to get in. They couldn't keep up with demand. And so by the time we opened on February 17th, 2015, there were no tickets to be had. So it kind of created this, this sort of frenzy around it. Can you see it? Have you seen it? And it became this, sort of center of conversation for a very small part of the world, but for a part of the world that can give you an indicator of whether you have a chance to move to Broadway. But that was still a kind of gamble, because by the time we announced we were going to Broadway, we stayed at the public, to answer your question, till I think May 3rd. So January 20th to May 3rd. And we opened on Broadway August 6th.
A really interesting dynamic here is In the Heights, 2007, Is that correct?
2007 off Broadway, 2008 Broadway, yeah.
2008 Broadway, pre-social media to a large degree. I said I didn't really get on Facebook until 2009. It was my 10-year college reunion, and the only way to find out about it was through Facebook.
Right.
But certainly not the type of jet fuel behind In the Heights on social media as you did with Hamilton, right? Hamilton,
Yeah, not at all.
2017, it is all over Facebook, right? And you got to go see it. You got to go see it. That's actually when we got an opportunity to go see it. How do you think about social media in the realm of theater, right? And also television, which you're doing a lot of work in. But broadly, how do you use social media for marketing?
Well, as someone who's not on any social media, my relationship to it is through my friends and some of the projects that I work on. And look, I happen to be incredibly close to someone who is probably in the Broadway space the most effective and impactful user of Twitter. I mean, Lynn understands intuitively, I think, how Twitter could function, it was a way for him to create transparency. And I think, I remember when Lynn, and I don't remember exactly when Lynn joined Twitter, but when In the Heights went to Broadway, for instance, it opened on Broadway in February of 2008, Lynn was making YouTube videos in a way that like most people in the theater weren't. Like if you look, and they would get 50, 75,000, 100,000 views. That's a lot of people. Remember, only 2,500 people can see the show a week. And so what you're doing is you're creating other access points to it. And you're getting it beyond just the people that live in New York, beyond the people that can afford a theater ticket, beyond the people that even care about theater. And so he was always really savvy about that, but he didn't do it with a kind of intentionality that's like, now I'm gonna have people come see my show. He did it because he thought it was fun. I think there was a purity to that, which people also responded to, because as well as I do, people can smell an ad from a long way away. Right. And that was not sponsored content in any way. Like we weren't pretending we didn't have a show that was happening off Broadway or on Broadway, and we were doing Heights. But it was also early enough in that period of social media where it just wasn't as saturated. Right. So I remember when Lynn got to 25,000 followers. I remember when he got to 96,000 followers, and then I remember when he got to 500,000 and 1 million and 1.5 million and 2 million. And all of a sudden, you realize also the people that were following Lynn on Twitter were a lot of people in the entertainment business that help people decide what to see. Right. Help people decide where to spend their money. Help people decide where to take their extra time. That if you go to New York and you're only going to see 2 things, and it's too expensive and it's hard to travel with your family, and maybe you get one trip there, because again, it was only in one place. It was only serving 1,300 people at the Richard Rodgers Theater on Broadway, both for In the Heights and Hamilton. They played the same theater. Right. So by the time, we started working on Hamilton, there's clearly a correlation between what the internet did for that Obama video, which completely went viral, and millions of people watched it, and it was brought into schools and teachers were playing it for kids. But then there was nothing released except for that for 6 years. The only way to see it and interact with it was to go and actually be in the theater. And so, again, to kind of continue the metaphor that I was using, I feel like directing is very similar to being a chef and running a kitchen. And so some things are defrosting, some things are in the oven, some things are in lots of different parts, out on a countertop. But you have to make the meal every time. If you make a movie, it's exactly the same for everybody who sees it. Their experience of how they encounter it, a screen, a theater, a tablet might be different, but the material is the same. Theater, someone gets sick. Theater, it's a matinee versus an evening. It's a Friday versus a Saturday. So you have to make the meal each time. And again, in the same way that I didn't want people in the kitchen watching us cook, and I wanted them to sit and actually just like have the meal when it was ready. I think that In the Heights taught me a lot about how to try to protect the process, how to try to protect what that is. And I think that what Lynn did along the way of the process was let people feel access, hey, like I stay up late because I didn't do my homework too. Like Lynn isn't a guy who was turning it in 6 months early. He was like, not sleeping tonight, I got to write a song. And I think it made people feel included. And I think that had a big impact on Hamilton's ultimate reach. And a lot of the things we ended up doing, we had this Ham for Ham series, which were these videos, because on the very first day we moved to Broadway was July 13th, 2015. And we used to have this little lottery downtown, and the lottery was $10 tickets, ham for ham, down at the Public. And about 150 people would show up, for a 290 seat theater. Like, that's a lot. And they were all aiming for a limited amount of seats, call it, 4 pairs, 5 pairs, something like that. And they would literally have like a bingo thing. And they call Marcus Shaw, like 2 tickets, and that person would scream and everyone would high five him. And when we got to Broadway the first day, the first performance, we stepped outside. It was me and Lynn, and we wanted to see if people showed up for the lottery. And we looked in front of the theater. We were at the stage door, and there was a group. And then the guy who was at the stage door, Jimmy, said, "Look that way." And we looked down 46th Street, and there was a line to 8th Avenue 4 deep. And we closed the door. It's like in the cartoons when you're like, and we looked at each other, and Lynn said, "I have to go out there. I have to go and say hi to all these people that came." Like that, like of their own free will, they, through their lottery, their lottery ticket was submitted here. So like, I should go say hey. He went out there. People were so excited when he went out. And this is actually online too. A lot of people filmed it. And as I was watching him, I thought, if there are 700 people here and 10 of them get selected, you have 690 people who said, "Oh, I didn't get in. It wasn't for me." That's their story. And I was like, we have to change that story. We have to give something to everybody that shows up. And Lynn walked back in, and I said, "Lynn, I don't know how many people that was." It turned out it was like 750 or something like that. I said, someone has to go out every preview and like say hi, sing a song, bring a ukulele, do whatever it is, and let that be the experience. So then instead of what you didn't get, what you say is, what I did get is Chris Jackson doing this. I did get Pippa doing this. I did get Leslie doing this, or Lynn did this, or David did this. That becomes part of the story. And those hand for hands became so popular, the cops had to shut down the street, and we eventually had to stop doing them. 2,000 people would show up.
Wow.
2,000 people would show up constantly just to see who would step outside. And then we started bringing in other members of the Broadway community. "Hey, that person from the show across the street, here's a platform for you." It was very much, if the tide was rising, or let's all go up, and not trying to make it just about Hamilton, but trying to make it about the breadth of the Broadway season. So that's a very long answer to your question, but that's one of the ways that I think social media also impacted, because those hand for hands became ways for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people to also say, that's my connection to it. And though I wasn't on the street, did you see what they did yesterday? Did you see that little, did you see the sketch they did? Did you see that song they sang? And I think it made people feel connected.
You once characterized this, it was going to sink or swim with the team that we had. Tell me a little bit about how that all happened, who all, what type of people were trying to get involved, and how you made the decision that you had to close the doors on the process and really focus internally.
Well, I think, the team was put together, it was Lynn, our friend Alex, who had worked on In the Heights with us. So we knew Alex since 2003, 2004. Andy Blankenbuehler, who we met in 2005, we ended up choreographing In the Heights. So that was that was a choreographer, music director, composer, and director. That's sort of like at the center of the target. And then right outside that are designers, the people that I hire to, take the blueprint and build the house. So costume designer, Paul Taswell, I think this was my 6th or 7th show with him. I first started working with him on In the Heights. Lighting designer, Hal Binkley, who recently passed about a month ago. He was kind of the first member of our group to not be here to witness, and it's been something we've been really struggling with. And Hal was he was 64 years old when he died. And so when I met him, he was already 30 Broadway shows in. When I met him in 2008, that was my 5th or 6th show with Howell. Nevin Steinberg, our sound designer, and David Corrins was our set designer. I'd done many shows. So I built my team with the support of Jeffrey and with Lynn from people that I'd worked with. That's really the responsibility I have. Put that group together. They then hire their own staffs, their own respective staffs, and that's on them. Like, I don't hire the band. Alex does. Paul hires the associate costume and the dressers and the wig. I have consultation on that, but that's really, his jurisdiction. And then the, casting is everything. And if you have the right people, you have a chance. And if you don't, you ain't got a chance. And I really slowly put this company together. Many of the people I've worked with, Chris Jackson, I'd done In the Heights with, and was in my group Freestyle Supreme. I'd known him since 2002. He ended up playing George Washington. David Diggs, who played Thomas Jefferson, was in Freestyle Supreme. I'd known him since like 2009, 2010. then lots of people that I met through casting. Renee Goldsberry I met through casting, who played Angelica. Jasmine Cephas Jones, who played Mariah and Peggy, I met through casting. Anthony Ramos, who ended up playing Philip Lawrence, I met casting Heights years before, and we hadn't cast him, and he came back in for this. A lot of the ensemble, the dancers, were from In the Heights too, and so we took time. That's the thing, is I always say to my casting directors, I'll probably take 30% more time, but I feel like our company will be 100% better for it. So it's so important to me that I'm, as the person responsible for who's in the room. If you're an actor in my show, Marcus, and you show up and you're supposed to be in love or a sibling of character X, you have to trust me. You don't have any say in that. Right. So you need me to look out and be like, okay, this is someone I think you would vibe with. I think it's someone that you're really going to be able to connect with, because we're going to spend some long days and nights together over this next month, 2 months, 6 months, a year. If it's a musical, you sign a year contract. And I feel that responsibility very deeply. So, I was taking care of that. Jeffrey was looking for other producers, other lead producers, and then investors for him to raise the capital necessary for the show. And that was his purview. I had faith in Jeffrey. I knew he was going to have good people. Jeffrey had a track record. He'd produced Rent and Avenue Q and a lot of other things. So he had his people that he could go to. And I don't want to speak for him, but my sense is the people that were there with you at the beginning are a lot of the people who you end up bringing, the people that believed in you when it wasn't so popular. That's certainly something that I know has value. For me, as I look and see a lot of the people that I collaborated with 15 or 20 years ago are still in my life, I think for that same reason. So that was really where I kept my focus, being really certain that everybody who walked into the room energetically would be on the same page and would just be additive. I just wanted people who could come in and do things that I couldn't do, and trust that. And then, with the press of the show, there was so much demand for press, and I was very involved with Jeffrey and with Lynn, and just determining where you wanted to give access there, because once the press is in the room or cameras in the room, the alchemy changes. You're being witnessed in a different way. So we really tried to, again, keep the theater as safe as possible. And that allowed us to keep our focus on what was in front of us, which was making the show better.
One thing that stuck out to me is, you talk about your cast, the whole group of people that you work with. It's called a company in theater. And when we think about a company, most times we think about, shareholders and some type of business enterprise. But when you talk about talent, there seems to be a really clear role between talent in theater and the company there and the need for talent in a business enterprise. Do you have any real words of wisdom that you share with folks about recruiting actors and dancers or recruiting people for business?
Well, I think you're absolutely right that there's a deep connection and similarity there. Some of the other people that are important sort of on the maintaining of the show, which is really what you're doing once the show opens. You're trying to maintain, those impulses and let the show evolve. Your stage manager and your company manager. So in the theater, those are really important hires. And the person that opened the show for me on Broadway, Jason Bassett, I'd done 3 or 4 shows with, and he's the person who's there day to day, because once the show opens, I'm not. Right. And so Jason is responsible for hiring the other stage managers, who are the people that are backstage, that are helping both run the show, put in new actors if someone gets injured, all of that day-to-day stuff. Like, I'm not there 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day anymore. And it's a lot of, it's a lot of necessary faith in the people that are going to be helping you, again, maintain. That's the word that I think about. So those are essential hires. There's also company management, who are the liaison between the producing entity and the cast, everything from tickets to doctors to taking care of family to bringing people backstage after a show to doing payroll, like all of those very company-based things. And one of the challenges that you have is in theater, it's not set up to exist for years and years and years. In the way that if you make a company, a lot of the companies you make outside of the entertainment industry, you're hoping are probably going to be there for a while. So you think about how to structure them in a different way. And what happened with Hamilton is we scaled our business very quickly. So we have obviously we're, here in the midst of this pandemic and, the middle of September of 2020. But when we shut down our productions, we shut down 6 productions with 2 being planned. So, so it's 8 total, 6 that we're running. So it's hundreds of employees. We had 5 in North America and 1 in Europe and in London. And we're, other shows have had that many companies, Lion King and Jersey Boys and Wicked have had, many, many, many shows have, Mormon. But we went from 0 to 5 very, very quickly. Wow. And so from 2015, when there was 1 place in the world, to 2018, I think that was when our 5th company opened. So to multiply, it's not multiplying, it's actually exponents. Right. And so that I think was something that we didn't have a real precedent or playbook for, because people had done that. And our producer, Jeffrey, had Rent had that many companies for sure, but not that quickly. So that was something too, like, again, if it's supposed to exist without me on the day-to-day basis, then there's going to be these road companies where I might cast them and rehearse them and then not see them for months and months. So again, you're trying to create environment around them to keep things clear, to keep things fluid and focused, and also know that I'm only going to intermittently be able to physically interact with them. So a lot of that management, which is I think inherent in a healthy company outside of the entertainment business, is also within.
Tommy, this has been incredible, brother. It's been over 30 years we've known each other. If I look back to where we had dinner back in 2004, we knew that this day was coming, but we didn't know how it was coming. And that's
you might have known it. I don't know. I was probably just hungry.
No, man, you've always had it. You are more than just a director. You are more than a creative. You're a true leader in entrepreneurship. Thank you for spending time teaching us about how you've built, managed, and sold not only Hamilton, but a number of other projects that you've been involved in. And we think that we're all better for it, learning what this entrepreneurial process is like. And I think the words that I take from you on this are, make something that doesn't require you to be there all the time. And that's what legacy is about. And you've done it at the highest level. So I appreciate it, man. Godspeed. And I think we're going to have some time to talk with a few folks here in Chattanooga and do a little Q&A. And so we'll get prepared for that.
I look forward to it. Thank you for having me. And I appreciate you inviting me to have a conversation that started 30 years ago for us. So it's fun to keep on talking.
All right. Well, there we go. What a great opportunity to learn about the product and the process of building an incredible production like Hamilton. We've had a great opportunity to learn the history and the story of how Tommy got involved. And now we have the man himself joining us for some Q&A. Tommy, how are you doing, brother?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Your background is much better than mine.
My background is also much better than it was before during the interview. I've upgraded.
I like to try to keep mine consistent just so people aren't don't worry, I'm in the same place. No evolution.
Well, look, man, we've got an incredible group of people that are on this webinar and are listening. Just heard kind of how you built, managed, and sold Hamilton and the success that you had with that. And so we've got a lot of questions, man. People, we've got business people, we've got artists, we've got creators, we've got entrepreneurs, adults and children that have just absorbed that material. And so one of the things that jumps out with you is, the biggest question people have is, when did you know? What was the point that you knew you had a hit? You talked a little bit about it in the interview, but do you remember that feeling? Like, is it like hitting the lottery, one distinct moment where you know you have a hit, and what did it feel like?
No, it's like 4 quarters that add up to $1. It feels like it was that moment that I spoke about, on that first preview. There were some signs when the show started selling well downtown. And then it really wasn't until we went on sale in March of 2015. We were still playing at the Public Theater, but we put a block of tickets on sale for Broadway. And we had a really good first couple days, which showed the enthusiasm was also translating. People not only wanted to see it, but they were willing to travel to New York. They were willing to purchase tickets. So I think that was probably the third of those. So that was, kind of a couple times in January with those indicators, and then in March. And then, once we got to the first preview on Broadway, which was July 13th, 2015, I remember looking outside the first preview, and there was about 3 hours before the show, there was a line of 700 people down the block. They were just there to play the lottery, just there to try to get $10 tickets. And I had a sense then that something was happening. So those are some of the early indicators, but we never could have imagined that it would be something that was so sustaining.
Yeah, that's incredible. A lot of people have questions about you and, that moment where you fell in love with theater. You talked about the fact that, you were 21, which in the world of theater is, a veteran, I'll say. You're seasoned, that you're getting into it at that age. We talked a lot about your history as being a great soccer player coming up through middle school and high school. But
maybe it stopped in high school.
But what did it feel like? What were your inspirations as somebody in theater? What pieces did you really enjoy that inspired you to move on and find your creative juices in theater?
Well, I was someone who grew up, I watched a lot of movies and a lot of television. I didn't go to see a lot of theater, but it never occurred to me to look at the beginning or the end for the credits and study who made the things that I liked, the television shows that I liked, or some of the movies that I would watch over and over again. And it really wasn't until I got into college that I started really thinking a little more broadly beyond just the actors and the writer, but thinking about who produced it, who directed it, who designed it. So Frank Capra was a big hero of mine. The name of my production company is Old 320 Sycamore, and It's a Wonderful Life is a really seminal movie for me, and I watch it with my family all the time. Like a good Jewish kid watching a Christmas movie. The address of the house that George Bailey buys, that's kind of dilapidated, that he turns into his dream home, the address is 320 Sycamore. So Frank Capra, the spirit of possibility, was always coursing through the work that he made. And I was someone as a kid, and I wasn't watching hugely sophisticated things, but I was watching, Indiana Jones, and I was watching, all the Spielberg movies. And then my mom would introduce me to some other filmmakers, Billy Wilder, who made The Apartment, which was a really important movie for me. He sort of showed that you could use comedy to talk about serious things. So that was something that was really resonant with me. And, and then on the sort of theatrical side, I went to a lot of those big mega musicals, that would come through town, the Les Mises, the Cats, the Starlight Express, a lot of the British imports. And it really wasn't until my early 20s when I started studying theater that I became more aware of, the American idiom. Jonathan Larson, who wrote Rent, was not someone that I knew about when that show came out in 1996. Obviously, it was really informative for so many people in my life, including Lynn, who's now making a movie, Tick, Tick, Boom, about the creation of Jonathan's first show. So it's, Jonathan is someone who's really related to a lot of the work that I did. But it was really, my experience over those early years of my 20s. I did a lot of research. I went to the Lincoln Center Library, where they have the film and tape archive. And my mother is an archivist, so I spent a lot of time in libraries. And they have almost every show that's been on Broadway that ran for a certain amount of time recorded, but you can only watch it there. And I decided to watch the last 25 years of every play that won the Tony Award and every musical that won the Tony Award. And that's really where my education started. I went there so often, they actually gave me an award. I went to the library. I was such a nerd that the library said, we would like to give you a citation for spending way too much time here. So that was really where I kind of found a lot of those, those treasures. Shows like Dreamgirls, Chorus Line, that Sweeney Todd, a lot of the shows that really informed some of the stuff that I ended up making.
That's pretty amazing. And that's a story I actually never knew. But the fact that greatness studies greatness, I think says a lot about what it takes to be an entrepreneur, what it takes to be somebody that's going to do something well. I mean, to sit and look at 25 years of award-winning Broadway productions and plays and movies in order to understand what that path for success looks like is pretty incredible.
I also had no friends, clearly. So, I mean, let's be honest. I had some free time, it seemed.
The early 2000s were tough years for everybody, man.
Everybody.
So, another question that folks were really, I would say, was a surprise to people, is that it takes 5 years, to put a musical together.
That's fast. 5 years
And
is
that's
fast.
fast, right?
Yeah.
What's happening during that time? I mean, how do you stay encouraged and engaged in the process? 5 minutes for a lot of people today is a lot. 5 years as a fast bar is pretty difficult for anybody.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think it's something that a lot of your entrepreneurs, as well as the artists, will understand, which is you're not getting paid to develop, and so things take time because we're all doing side hustles. I was a personal assistant from 2001 until 2005. That was how I made my money. I worked for somebody and helped support them in whatever way I could, and that gave me the amount of money I needed to pay my rent and eat some food so I could go and do my other stuff. So, we were all doing 2 or 3 jobs at the time. And so these development processes are often protracted because you're not working 40 hours a week on it. That's impossible, especially in your early days. But look, even when I was doing Hamilton, we were pretty established in our respective careers, but it was just me and Lynn for 1.5 years. There was no producer attached. 2 years, there was no producer attached. So you're really doing it on your own dime and on your own free time. And so if you think about it that way, from Lynn wrote the first song in 2009, the show premiered in 2015, but it took him 2 years to write the first 2 songs, not because he was trying every day to write them and had writer's block, but because he was finishing the last year of being in the Heights and had a day job 6 days a week, 50 weeks a year. When we started working on In the Heights, he was a substitute teacher, so we could only meet after school or on the weekend. So a lot of that has an impact because we don't have a system where our government or often our theaters are able to give us a sustainable living wage to just focus on the work. So you're almost always stirring one pot while you're defrosting something else, while you're putting something in the oven. So the life of a director and a producer and a writer, you're always working on 6 to 8 different things, some of which will never come to fruition, some do, but you have to accommodate for the creative process also. You can't sit down with your writer and say, great, we need 2 songs to do this, this, and this. That's not coming back the next day. That could come back in a month, and you don't know when the muse is going to tap him on the shoulder and tell her, here's the song you were looking for. So those are also the things that you have to try to build space for, create structure for you both to, and those early days are, the 3 or 4 of you in the center of it, to have something to march towards, but also you have to leave room for inspiration to hit.
So one thing that also stands out about Hamilton in particular for me is you guys found so many ways to innovate and do things, not just the show being innovative, but things around the show. You talked a little bit in the interview about some of the ways that you set up compensation for the first company. You talked about the fact that you did EduHam and Ham for Hamilton, right? I mean, ways of utilizing social media that never been done before. Obviously, and I don't know if I told you this, we have secured a couple of annual subscriptions to Disney Plus for some of the folks in the crowd. So we'll have 3 lucky winners that get to see Hamilton on Disney Plus. But again, another method of bringing your art to people that really hadn't been done that way before. What are new opportunities to innovate in the theater space? And, which of those are you most excited about?
Well, it's interesting. I was talking to a bunch of people this week about all of the shows, the Broadway shows, the West End shows, and off-Broadway shows that are figuring out how to capture and deliver the experience to people at home. So Hamilton was one, but Ma Rainey's Black Bottom is coming out. There's an adaptation of a Broadway musical called Prom, which Ryan Murphy is making into a movie in the same way that In the Heights was a show and now will be a movie next year. And so many of these shows are having a translation to a film adaptation, but then more and more are having a big desire to capture the experience of being in the theater and try to deliver that to audiences. And I'm excited about that because, I was saying this to someone the other day. I think that your first experience with anything, and especially the theater, is what cultivates your interest in it as a long-term theater goer. If you go to the theater and don't see something that reflects back a feeling or a story that feels like it connects to you, that might be your last trip to the theater. But if you see something in that first time that makes you feel seen or makes you feel heard or makes you feel like you are with your people, you're going to come back and you're going to go see 5 shows, and give them all a chance. And maybe one of those shows sparks with you again, and you go see another 5 shows. Again, the cost of theater can be really challenging on Broadway, but in the regions, in the communities, it can be a much less expensive ticket price. So that theater is theater is theater. It doesn't just have to happen on Broadway. That's not the only legitimate theater, far from it. So I think I'm excited that some of these folks that are sitting at home, forced there because of the pandemic, as so many of us are, that we can't go to live theater, but yet can have theater delivered to us. I think they work in tandem. I don't think that means we don't go see live theater when it comes back. I think they're companions, and I think they can live alongside each other. And I think it gives us a chance to develop a new generation of theater goers. Young people may be seeing Hamilton right now that are 5, 8, 12 years old, who might say, oh, that's what theater is? Okay, I'd like to participate as someone who makes it, or as someone who wants to sit in a seat and absorb it. So that's something that I'm really looking forward to.
So, I mean, to that point, how did you guys figure out the Disney deal? I mean, for most people, they hadn't seen anything like that. Does Disney approach you? Do you guys kind of say, we want to share this with a broader audience? What does that process look like? And I know you're involved, but there are a number of other people on your team that are involved with that. What does it take to make that happen?
I mean, it takes a lot of deep conversation within the group. So within our group, Jeffrey Seller is our lead producer, so he's my partner in all of this. Lin-Manuel, obviously, John Bazzetti, who represents me, and Lynn, who's our agent, is very deeply involved. And then there's obviously other producers and other members of the creative team that we'll have conversations with. But really, I'm trying to think of when the first conversation happened. We knew we wanted to capture it because remember, we captured it as an independent venture. We didn't know where it was going to go, and I think that gave us a lot of freedom. So we captured it, which meant we financed it, and we then got a chance to go and make it and then take it to the marketplace. And so what we did was we made something between 2016 and 2018 that we were proud of. We then invited different studios to screen the film and decide if they wanted to partner with us. And then we narrowed that and ended up, pretty quickly figuring out what we thought the best path forward was. And so, we, in that way we kind of like created like our own little festival. Some people will make a film and have a chance to go to a festival. This is what happened with this documentary I made, Freestyle Love Supreme. We made it independently. We got into Sundance. People saw it at Sundance and decided that they wanted to make an offer. So the festival served as a place for people to come together, and it became a marketplace. We sort of created our own marketplace with Hamilton, and that's how we arrived at Disney. And really, from our meeting with them, we just had a sense that the partnership was going to be collaborative and sort of open and deep conversation about everything. They obviously are incredible stewards of brand. Everyone is aware when Disney makes a Disney property, but when you think about Marvel, when you think about Lucasfilm, when you think about Pixar, I mean, like, they're actually incredible stewards of brands, and they have a real track record at letting the art that they acquire and then distribute remain the art that they acquired. And so that was our instinct, and that was absolutely our experience with working very closely with them.
So I've got a fun one here. We had a buddy last year that talked about Shaquille O'Neal missed investing in Starbucks, and so ended up investing in Fordo Coffee because he said he never wanted to miss a coffee investment again. Is there a person, without naming names, if we got to maintain the innocence of the people that missed the opportunity, but is there anybody that wanted to get on the Hamilton ride and decided that it wasn't the right thing for them and turned around and is kicking themselves because they missed an opportunity to invest?
I don't know. I have to say, and this is one of the things that was actually really great about the position that I was in, because I was not a producer of Hamilton. Those conversations were happening in other rooms. I was trying to make the show with my friends, and Jeffrey and Jill Furman and Sandy Jacobs, the other two main producers. They were having a lot of those conversations. So maybe when you podcast and then Q&A them, you might get a different answer. But I only know that I was trying to figure out Act 2 and see if we could make it work.
Well, if they want to bring their road show for the deals for anything you're involved in through Chattanooga, I think you'll have a few folks that would like to put a few shillings in. One question that's also come up is the pandemic, right? Corona's changed Broadway. Do you have thoughts? Are you having conversations about when people think Broadway will come back, and what will look different? Is it permanently impaired, or do we think that we get back sometime in the foreseeable future?
The short answer is I don't know a lot more than what's being reported. Obviously I have long conversations with Jeffrey. We have a production in Australia, which is going to be going up as planned, starting rehearsal in January. They've obviously had a very different relationship to their own cities, Sydney and Melbourne, some of the bigger cities there, and how they've been able to handle the outbreak. So we're planning on that production proceeding. So that's live theater that hopefully will be up in March of next year. In terms of Broadway, Broadway just announced that they're not going to be selling tickets for anything through May of next year, and that's sort of what I know as well. I think that what I do know is my sense is it'll be different potentially for when shows come back if it's a new show versus a show that existed. Right now there are theaters where Wicked is, where Lion King, where Hamilton is, where the set is there, everything's built, and when it's safe to go back, you make sure that the theater is as safe as it needs to be if there's any ventilation issues, but the set is built. You're not having to start from scratch and build things, which a lot of other shows that we're planning to be in, and then shops are shutting down, construction shops where they're making things, so the ramp up is a little different. But I don't know what the protocol and precedent will be. What I do know is there are very significant conversations many times a week happening with the Broadway League and with the producers and with the unions, especially now that so many films and television shows are back to work, that there's a lot being learned about protocol. And I feel like our job is to listen and learn from those experiences. We obviously have a live audience to also navigate, which is an incredibly significant and an essential thing that we need to get right. So the key is, don't get back until we're ready. And I wish I could say it was this date or that date. I don't know that, but I know that it's not going to be before the end of May for Broadway. That's what's been announced.
And you've directed television as well. Do you see a lot of talent, both actors, directors, and producers? Are folks, shifting from Broadway back to TV and movies, or most people specialists that really act only really involved in Broadway?
No, I think that, especially if you're talking about actors often enjoy working in film and television. It's long hours for shorter periods of time. There's a lot of benefit in terms of how widely the thing can be seen. There's residual income, so there's passive income, which comes through their unions, which is not always the case in a Broadway show, where you sort of have to, for the most part, go and do the show to earn your money. And the challenge is there's only X amount of jobs. It's very, very competitive. And so it's usually not out of lack of desire that people that work in the theater don't work in film or television. It's about opportunity and about making those opportunities. So I think that there's a lot of people who have made their life in the theater, in a very intentional and sort of full way over the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years, who now might be able to, only focus on putting their energy into trying to, make some inroads in film and television. But, it's tough, and it's a lot of people trying to get in the door. So it's a very crowded and competitive marketplace. And there's not a lot of people that hold the key to these places. So the desire to do it might be at a high level. The amount of opportunities, just in the sort of supply and demand, is I think something that will also determine how feasible that is. But my hope is that people can find work, if they can't make their own work, that they can try to find places, obviously using their craft to make their livelihood. Right now, it's a real challenge. And so there's a lot of our friends, that are struggling with that.
Yeah. So I got a question from a 12-year-old here in the audience.
Okay. That's about
so get ready for
2 years more advanced than I am.
An actor wants to know, how do they shift from an actor to a director, for a middle school or high school production, and then also wants to know, what is the process and when will they be able to produce a high school version of Hamilton?
The high school version of Hamilton has to do with the rights and licensing. So that's a decision that's in a room that I'm not in. And I don't know the answer to that, but I look forward to seeing all those productions. I'm excited about that when it does happen. And, I think it really depends on who you are, but I learned best by doing. So one of the nice things that, that's true about being in school, whether it's middle school or high school or college, is that there's a lot of the producing, which is taken care of. It's not that hard to get space in college. It's very hard to get space to produce a show when you're not in college. When you're in a city, whether it's Cleveland or Boston or Chicago or New York City, it's a very, very competitive and an expensive part of producing. There's only so many spaces, and it always costs more money than you think. Whereas in college, you can go to your professor and say, hey, is anybody using the gym from 8 to midnight? Or you go to the facilities manager and say that. Like, we were doing our shows in the gymnasium, sharing it with the volleyball team when I was in college. We were using rehearsal rooms that weren't being used as classrooms, and we just thought, if we lock up and keep everything clean, can we use them? So that really helped us practice and hone, because that's how we got our 10,000 hours. So I think it's really great to learn by studying, by reading what you can, by watching other people do it, and then by doing. So if you're in middle school or high school, and there's an opportunity to maybe assist one of the directors, if it's a teacher or a visiting professional, I think that can have a lot of utility. I think it's also important to try to make your own work outside of school, so you can, with your friends, anything can be a theater. You can do a lot of stuff outside now. That's obviously getting colder, but do your version of Shakespeare in the Park, but write a play if you don't want to do Shakespeare, and get your friends together and recruit them. And if you listen to a lot of people that make theater, a lot of their childhood was, and then I grabbed 3 neighbors and 2 dogs and my sisters, and we made a show. So I think it's about doing and doing and doing.
So 20 years you've been doing this now. Was there ever a point where you said, you know what, I'm just going to go be a lawyer, or,
No.
Never.
Not for 1 second. No, never.
So how did you, granted you've had a couple of the biggest hits ever, but when there was a point where you were challenged or a point where you were down, how did you get through that? Was it friends? Was it internal? Was it keeping an eye on the bigger picture? What was your method for getting through the troughs?
The trough of despair. I love talking to entrepreneurs. I listen to a lot of How I Built This by Guy Raz, so I'm pretty hip to this. Startup, I listen to all those podcasts too.
We're there.
I think friends are really important. I think your collaborators, the people that you're with day in and day out that understand. I think it's really nice to talk to people that just implicitly get what you're expressing, because they're where you are. It's nice to talk to people that have gotten out of that spot, just like it's nice to be with people that haven't yet entered that. So I think the people around you provide a real ballast. And for me, it was just the work. I could always go back into the work. I knew I could always be better. I knew I could always do more. There's a lot that you can't control, Marcus, and I think this is something that we all experience in our lives, and certainly feeling that, in a moment of, sort of global pandemic. So what can you control? And in the work, I could control my attitude, and I could control how much time I put into it. That was up to me. What happened was not up to me. But I just thought, well, then I won't be outworked, and I'll have the best possible attitude. And those are 2 things that have gotten me a lot of my subsequent jobs. People didn't mind being with me, and they knew that I was going to come early and I was going to stay late. And so if you can decide that you don't want to be outworked, you can get ahead. It also then gives you something to do, and it gives you community. And for me, my work really only exists as a director and a producer, an occasional writer, but really a director and a producer, when I'm with other people. So that also then connects me back to the first point, which is be with other people, be creative, be making things. Because I wasn't getting paid in my 20s. I mean, really any of my 20s to direct. So if you were to work another job where they said you're going to work 8 years and not get paid, and when I say not get paid, I mean, maybe I made $1,000 or $2,500 a year from this. Like, I really was not getting, I was doing it for free. I was making my living doing other things. And, that's what it's going to be like. You have to anticipate that as a young director in your 20s, you're going to be hiring yourself. It's going to be really hard to get other jobs. There are anomalies, of course, but that's the reality. And if you want to go into a job where you know you're working 5, 6, 7, 8 years and not making any real money, so you have to have another job along with it, there's also not a lot of time to be in any trough, because you got to go bust your butt to, try to earn the dough so you can do what you want to do.
Right. So I've got kind of a three popcorn questions here, kind of rapid fire.
I'm ready.
You ready? All right, you got to brace up, man. Here we go. If you could go back in time and work in any Player musical that you have not worked in, what would it be and why?
What show would I like to have been around?
Yeah.
Maybe A Chorus Line, which was really the first workshop musical, which took stories of the real people, of the dancers, and created a show out of it. Michael Bennett was complicated to work with, and the process of that was not one that I would have handled in the same way. But that show really put Broadway on a different map, and it was a story about people looking for work. And I think that's why the show resonated and ran for 15 years on Broadway and toured for so long. We all know what it's like to want a job. The first number is, I hope I get it. God, I hope I get it. That's a show that I think was quite meaningful and seismic in that way. And it would have been something to be around that. And then, I think the original production of Fiddler is also something that I would have wanted to be around. Jerome Robbins, again, a very difficult man to work with. But the spirit of that show is something that I feel like really addresses so much of what I care about, community and the challenge to a community when things change, which is effectively what that show is. So that's not too popcorny, but it is 2 answers.
That's pretty good, man. Pretty good. I was worried for a second there. All right, number 2.
You were worried it was too long, or that I didn't have an answer?
I don't know. You were thinking there for a while, man. I was like, those 25
There's a lot
years.
of shows. There's a lot of shows, Marcus.
It's 25 years of watching film, man. All right, number 2, for the introverts in the room, right? And who would think you could be an introvert and be in Broadway, right? It's literally the biggest fear for almost everybody, but there are, I assume.
Of course. Yeah.
What's your recommendation for people, particularly young folks, overcoming some of those introvert fears and being either a director, actor, producer, whatever?
Look, most people's greatest fear is not death. It's speaking in public. And to stand in front of a group of 10 people, 100 people, 1,000 people, and express yourself either in character or as yourself is terrifying. And most of the people that you see perform have at some moment had to overcome that and climb over that hill. And some of them, it happens 10 years into their career, some 15, some people work through it, but it's a real challenge. But I think that there's a lot of introverts, that work in the theater. There's also different positions that you can have, right? There's, designers who are not necessarily in front of huge groups of people. Writers are often not in front of huge groups of people. They're often on their own. Actors obviously have to, take on a different task in the storytelling. But I think it's, you know what your interests are and what your passions are. And if you're doing something that is completely terrifying to you constantly, you need to assess if it's the best thing for your well-being. But I do think it's important to put yourself in situations, if you can, where you're not comfortable. And that's how you grow. So if it's something that causes panic and it is lasting for months and years of your life, maybe there's a moment to reassess that. But I think embracing and knowing you're going to encounter some uncomfortability means you're actually doing the work. If you're doing things that you don't ever feel unchallenged by or you always feel safe, you might not be pushing yourself in the fullest way. Which is not to say that introverts need to be on Broadway, but it just means think about what it is that you care about and try to do that.
Awesome. And so, one last question just around this. Any book, like, is there a dummies for theater? Like, what's a book that you really think really represents a way for people to learn more about the guts of the industry?
There's a great book called A Sense of Direction by Bill Ball, which I really liked. He was a really good director in the regions. Worked a lot at the Old Globe in San Diego, wrote a really beautiful book about directing, which I always thought was very meaningful. And then I also loved reading directors talking about directors. The two other books I'd recommend, one is by Walter Murch. I think it's called Conversations with Murch, and it's incredible. He's a film editor. And the other one is another conversation book called Conversations with Wilder, which is Billy Wilder and Cameron Crowe. Cameron Crowe made Jerry Maguire and Singles and Almost Famous, and his hero was Billy Wilder. And he sat down for these interviews. That's mostly and more about film directing, but it's an incredible book, and I've given it as a gift to many, many people.
Well, Tommy, that's an appropriate end, because we're going to give a gift away now to 3 lucky winners who are, you want a drum roll for me, man, and I'll call them out?
Me drum roll?
You're the director. Maybe I drum roll, and then, we just go from there. All right, we'll
just call them out.
We'll just call them out. All right, so the winners, you've heard the story, you've met the man, and now you'll get to see the show via a year-long subscription to Disney Plus, where Hamilton is featured. Darren Edwards, Claire Crunk, and Shayna Haynes. If you're there, throw your name up in the throw a congrats up in the chat, and we're super excited. Tommy, this was incredible. Not only the interview, but taking a bunch of questions from our folks here. Again, you've done it at the highest level, man, and provided a lot of insight for our folks here in Chattanooga and really around the world that are listening to this on what it takes to be successful. Whether you think you have or not, I think the world definitely thinks you have. And keep pressing on.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me be a part of this, and I'm happy to see all the work that you're doing and all the good you're doing. So thanks for including me.
All right. Take care, brother.
Okay. Thanks, man. Bye. Bye, everybody.
All right. Well, everybody, thank you so much again for joining in with Thomas, Kail, and the team here. Collab, Build, Manage, Sell. This was the first of a series of conversations that we're going to have with innovators and creators and entrepreneurs of all types. And so, again, thank you to our winners. We'll connect you for the Disney Plus subscription for a year, and hope that you watch Hamilton and understand what success looks like in theater. Take care.
Here. You're doing great. I'm right here.
Here's Jen. I'm right here. You're doing great. We're here.
Being here matters now more than ever. As a Tennessee not-for-profit with a mission to serve, we've made a promise to be right here for you today and tomorrow.
If you need anything else, we'll be right here.
Picture a family consumed by constant online activity, pushing the limits of unlimited bandwidth in the device age.
You're using a lot of bandwidth. Prepare to pay.
Yeah, it's there. You're that piece. We've got EPB!
Oh, my bad.
It's comforting to know that there is one internet provider with no data caps or added fees, as we all cross over into the device age.
Where are you? Are you here? Are you there? Are you on this planet?
Are you on the way? On the verge? On the brink? Are you leading the pack or just getting started? Are you stuck? Did you decide somewhere along the way that this was the only place you could be? That everywhere else was out of reach? It's a simple question we ask ourselves constantly. Where am I? Where am I going? Where am I going to end up? But that's the wrong question. It misses the point entirely. So let me ask you the right question. Where would you rather be? Now that is a question for the bold. Where would you rather be? It's a reflection of self. It centers us and sets the course. It demands a calibration to what's important. That's the question that brings us to clarity. Because knowing where you are is one thing, but knowing what you fight for and what you believe in is everything. Where would you rather be? It points us to the larger questions that will define us. What will you dare do? What does winning mean? What will you leave behind? We know that by uncovering the answers, we can navigate from where you are today to where you want to go. Together. On your side, by your side. So with that, I ask you this one more time. Where would you rather be? We won't stop until we help you get there. So let's get started. Are you coming?
For more than 170 years, working people have trusted the financial protection benefits provided through Unum Group businesses. We protect tens of millions of individuals and families worldwide with benefits and services provided through the workplace. Our businesses, including Unum US, Colonial Life, and Unum UK, offer a range of valuable products, including short and long-term disability, life, dental, vision, accident, hospital, and critical illness insurance.